Hello, everyone. Let me quickly share my screen. Okay, is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Research and Color Foundation, for this incredible opportunity. As mentioned, I'm a recent graduate in International Development Policy from Duke University. The first half of the presentation, we have seen some advanced research in economics. The next few minutes, I'll be presenting a relatively more basic study, but hoping to set the foundation for my future research work. As you can see, the topic of my presentation is understanding the non-technical and non-financial barriers to digital inclusion, and I'm looking at the situation in Georgia. This started off as a master's project where I was designing a digital inclusion strategy for the government of Georgia. In this particular study, I go deeper into understanding the barriers that goes beyond infrastructure and finance. Over the past few months, I had the privilege to be mentored by Dr. Kehinde Ajayi of the World Bank. The problem I'm trying to address in this particular study is the issue of digital divide. Digital divide is a universal problem. Just 60% of the world's population has access to the internet, and large gap exists between the developing and the developed countries. Just 35% of the population in the developing countries have access to the internet. Looking at Georgia, there is a persistent digital divide between the rural and the urban areas. Overall, just 62.7% of the country's population is connected to the internet, trailing behind economically comparable countries like Azerbaijan and Armenia by at least 7 to 12%. And countries like Estonia and Lithuania are far ahead by at least 20%. To address this problem, I ask one question. What are the barriers to accessing technology in Georgia beyond infrastructure and finance? As the government rolls out massive digital infrastructure projects connecting citizens with the internet, are there other barriers that we need to consider to ensure digital inclusion? A closer look at Georgia, we see Georgia doing relatively well in terms of its income peers, but there is significant scope to grow in comparison to its regional peers and other global leaders. There is also significant difference between broadband penetration in the rural and the urban areas. And this digital divide exists not just in the connections, but in the way they use the internet. So if you look at Georgia, just 26% of its population uses the internet for internet banking, whereas the average in the EU is at least 51%. For this particular study, the field work was carried out in Georgia during my 8-day trip to the country. We conducted focus group discussions and key informant interviews. This was done in 3 rural villages. The recruitment of the participants were done with the support of a local NGO, and I made sure that as we invited people to participate in this discussions and interview, age, gender, socioeconomic background, educational levels, and employment status, etc., were taken into consideration. Also, it was made sure that the voices of the community leaders, religious leaders, village heads, telecom operators, entrepreneurs, government officials, etc., and women, young people, people from ethnic minorities were invited to be part of this discussion. Based on this qualitative research, here I provide an overview of the identified non-technical and non-financial barriers to accessing technology, setting the foundation for future research work. The identified barriers, I've clustered them into 3 different categories. The first one, user capabilities. Under this, some of the select demand-side barriers include low educational levels, lack of digital literacy, self-efficacy, language barriers. The next group of barriers are incentives and relevance. Under this, some of the significant barriers were lack of social influencers, lack of local content, different community norms and cultural preferences, lack of awareness of the internet, privacy and security concerns, personal attitudes, and existing patterns of cultural consumption. The third is accessibility, lack of equitable access, more for people with a disability, women, and older people. Moving ahead Keeping these barriers in mind, I hope to conduct further studies to assess the relationship between the identified barriers and digital inclusion. I would also like to understand the disparities in terms of ethnicity, gender, and those in conflict-affected regions. And I hope to explore further the different behavioral determinants of digital inclusion. I hope to receive any kind of feedback on the limitations of the study and areas to explore. Thank you so much for listening and for your time.